Welcome, everybody, and I would say good morning or maybe good afternoon, depending on which time zone you are in. But welcome to APEA's Nurse Practitioner Faculty Town Hall. My name is Dr. Amelie Ollier, and we're very, very pleased to be able to bring all of you together today. As we get started, I want you to know that there's a team behind the scenes who is here to help you. And just to give you a quick rundown, we have Maureen Garcia, Sarah Reed, who a lot of you might know because she interacts with a lot of our faculty. Our moderator for today, she's going to handle questions, is Michelle Perron. Jeannie Doucette is here with us, and so is Nina Gosson. If you need help during the webinar, we have people who are willing and ready to help you. But feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom. That'll get us right away. If you need to talk to us, we have an 800 number there for you. So you might write it down and keep it handy in the event you need anything. And of course, you can always reach us via email. We have that being monitored right now. I introduced myself, but I want to introduce the rest of the APEA nurse practitioner team. We're all here today to help you. And I want to introduce you first to Dr. Kathy Baldridge, who works for APEA as our Director of Psychometric Analysis. So she's the person who works with questions and reliability and validity and predictability of our exams. Jennifer Oakley is a nurse practitioner who works with us from Philadelphia. And Jennifer is she's a first-line provider in a busy ER in Philadelphia. So Jennifer, thank you for doing that. And she's here with us, is going to handle a lot on chat for us. And then I think a lot of people probably know Betty Vicknair, because Betty functions as our faculty liaison, our consultant for universities. And so she may know a lot of you, and you may know a lot of her as well. So Betty, thank you all, everybody, for being here with us. A couple more housekeeping issues. I feel like a lot of people are getting pretty savvy with Zoom right now, but in the event you're not, if you want to toss a question to one of the speakers or presenters, please use the Q&A feature, and Michelle is going to be handling that for us. And if you missed this, or one of your colleagues would like to have been here and wasn't able, this is going to be recorded and it'll be available on YouTube. And that's the site where you would get it. So we're going to record this for you and your colleagues who might not have been able to make it. Let's go ahead and get started. And this is what we think that we're going to talk about today. The first thing that we will talk about are suggestions for alternatives to clinical hours, indirect clinical hours. That is a huge issue for faculty right now. And we will put some things together for you and just share ideas. We want this to be a good sharing experience. We'll talk about ideas for proctoring alternatives, and I'll be the person who will talk about that. Dr. Kathy Baldridge is going to talk about how to keep your students focused and motivated right now, because so many of them are, away from school and want to test and just can't. So she'll handle that. And then you need to be taken care of as well. We'll talk about faculty stress reduction. And so that's where we're headed for the day. And Betty, let's talk about suggestions for alternatives to indirect clinical hours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amelie. And first of all, I'd like to say thanks to all of you who have joined us today, and a special shout out to all of our colleagues who use our products and who have reached out to me personally, especially since this pandemic began. It's great to have you on the webinar because you have shared some of your ideas and options with me. And this has helped me share your best practices, and whether you know it or not, you have helped many of your colleagues through me. And that's one of our purposes today, to share what we know in an attempt to help all of you stay focused during these uncharted times, which is going to lead us to some alternatives for indirect clinical hours. And for what I've been hearing, most of y'all have this as a major concern, a concern for both faculty as well as students, trying to decide what could be allowed or not could be very overwhelming. So what you have to remember first and foremost is that you need to stay within your university, NOF, State Board of Nursing guidelines, as well as following the criteria for evaluation of the NP programs by the NTE. That's the National Task Force on Quality Nurse Practitioner Education, of which both ANCC and AANP were co-facilitators. Remember that each university's needs, though, are different. I'd like to just share a little excerpt from the NTE on simulation and clinical hours. The elaboration section on criteria 3E states that simulation is recommended to augment the clinical learning experiences, particularly to address the high-risk, low-frequency incidents. However, simulation experiences may only be counted as clinical hours over and above the minimum 500 direct patient care clinical hours. And programs are encouraged to track the use of simulation to enhance the clinical experience. And they further stated that clinical experiences and time spent in each experience are varied and distributed in a way that prepares the students to provide care to the population served, which may include telehealth and international direct care experiences. So be mindful of this criterion when you make your decisions regarding simulation. Okay, so to give you a couple of suggestions for alternatives to your indirect clinical hours, some of you have shared with us community partnerships. Perhaps there are some facilities in your area that may allow students to participate on site while they maintain safety and use the protective equipment that we have to offer them. So they have to make sure they're using those PPEs diligently. For instance, they could be testing sites where they may be able to assess or triage patients and then maybe allow students to make decisions as to which patients might need testing. We're also aware of local areas in, around the Louisiana areas that did virtual clinics on wound care demonstrations where they presented the clinical background and the student was able to participate via telemed or the telehealth type clinic. So that could be something to consider. Perhaps the preceptors could allow students to join their telehealth sessions as well. These are just a thought. Maybe it could be an option for some of you. Another option that we've heard about were case studies, especially if you've not already incorporated them into your curriculum. You have to be careful of not double dipping too, because if your studies were already incorporated in your curriculum, you may not be able to use those as indirect hours as well. There's some universities who share with us that they're having group projects as a means of assessing student performances. And these projects could possibly include more difficult studies and challenges the students to incorporate critical thinking and clinical reasoning. Each student is responsible for a certain part of the case study, so it would be easy to determine how much work that student actually performed. And it could be, you know, cause for some grading on the faculty's part, but it is doable. So some of this may put a little bit more responsibility on the faculty's shoulders, but you got to do what you got to do, right? Another thing to consider is the review courses, whether they be online or maybe a live review course that has been transitioned into a live webinar format. So both of these options APEA does offer, and the online course provides sort of an interactive learning, and that the courses are actual recordings of our live review course presentations. They're not just voice over PowerPoint. The online review course also includes practice exams that are graded, and there's a manual in a PDF format. And upon completion of this, they're able to print out a certificate of completion that denotes the actual hours attended. So an online review course could be an option for you. The other option with the review course is our live webinars. As many of you are aware, we have transitioned our live review courses into live webinars, and we've actually held several of them already. And Dr. Ollier presents these courses online with PowerPoint and a live question and answer sessions. So this format also includes practice exams that are graded. It comes with a PDF manual and your certificate of completion as well. So they may be another option for you to consider. Articles that include graded exams upon completion may also be considered as alternatives. And like I said a few seconds ago, with the availability of telehealth, you may want to meet with some of the preceptors and see if they would be seeing patients in their clinic and allow students to join the telehealth session with them. You can maybe even include some mock patients as well if the preceptor is not in the clinical setting. So the preceptor could present the case and have the student answer questions related to that case, have them create a list of differentials, offer some treatment options, maybe interpret the labs, and then evaluate their overall plan of care. So these are just a few options that we've heard from many of you and some that we offer through our company, but these could possibly be some of the resources. I think that concludes what I have to offer for the alternative clinical hours, Amelie. So if you want to discuss the proctoring alternatives, which also is a concern for our faculty, I'm turning it over.
Debbie, you're right. This has been a big concern for our faculty, and many of you have contacted us to ask us questions about how to keep not only our APEA exams secure, but yours as well. And the primary issues we hear are that for faculty who had on-site programs, that now your students are all over the country. And so that creates a problem. The other thing is that it wasn't exclusive to ground programs, because programs that are online had problems as well, or are having problems. And one specifically was if they didn't already have a relationship with a proctoring company, then they weren't able to get a proctoring company because there was such an intense demand. So consequently, we kind of put our heads together and wanted to figure out what we could do to help our faculty keep their exams and our exams secure as well. And, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. We probably administer thousands and thousands and thousands of exams every year. We do a lot of it. And just some suggestions that we found that we think will help you as well is one of them is to require the students to take the exam at the same time. Now, we recognize that that can be impossible where people have shifts and they're working. But if you minimize the number of hours that exam is exposed to anybody who can reach it, that will help keep it secure as well. Unfortunately, we've become experts at this. And, we know that exam questions get tossed to Facebook groups. And Facebook groups are on standby to get questions that are on exams and to answer them. So one really important thing to do is to minimize the number of hours or minutes that exam is exposed to anybody who's going to take it. The other thing that's really important is to time the exam. If you give an exam that has, let's say, 150 questions, which is similar to APEA NPs exam, or maybe you give an exam that has 175 questions on it, you really need to time that exam and give about 3 hours for a 150 question exam, 3.5, which mimics ANCC's exam, 3.5 hours for 175 questions. So timing the exams will also help keep them secure, because when they have an open time, of course, there are books and lots of resources that people will refer to. And when you see them spending, more than a minute on a question, red flags go up for me that they're reaching out for other resources. Now, we have some really, really smart faculty that we interact with. And we heard this more than once, but for people who really wanted to be able to proctor their exam because their students were all over, but they were not able to get a proctoring company, they used Zoom, the same mechanism we are using right here. So they were able to watch students as they took their exams. Another option would be something like GoToMeeting. These are a couple of options that are not real expensive, but could also help keep your exams secure. Well, when Betty and Kathy and Jennifer and I were talking about this, I created this slide. It says some out-of-the-box ideas. And, you know, I have a brother who is a teacher, and so I bounce ideas off of him a lot as well. But this was one idea. If you don't have Zoom and you don't have some of these other options and you're concerned about test security, one suggestion was for you to write 5 multiple choice questions. It could be 3, it could be 5. 10 is probably too many. And instead of just checking that the correct answer was B or D, ask the student to write the rationale for not only his correct answer, the one that he chose, but let them write it for the ones that they didn't choose. If a student can do that, it makes them way more likely to have really known the material rather than just picking B because that was the question that their friend chose. So that was one idea that I thought was a little out of the box, but it works for certain places. If you have 300 students in your program, that probably is not going to be a viable option, but a lot of programs that may work for you. Another out-of-the-box idea is something that I've read. And in fact, I just read a quick article on this a couple of weeks ago that was sent to me by a faculty colleague who said that what he did was provide a case study, and it was extremely difficult, so that no matter what option the student took, there was a lot of peril with both options, and it was given to a group to work on. So they were allowed access to any materials that they wanted to use, but they had to provide a detailed rationale, again, for why they chose that answer and why the group didn't choose another option. So there's some other ways to do it, and maybe this has sparked some ideas for you as not specifically these, but as something else that may be of value to you. So we wanted to pass that on because exam security obviously is a big component of your programs. Kathy.
Hi, Dr. Amelie. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about keeping your students focused and motivated. We know that when they're in school, they're in that mode. And we don't want this to take them out of that mode because then they lose their momentum, right? And so we've had some town hall meetings with students, and we've heard from students, and that's one of their concerns is, how do I stay focused? How do I stay motivated? Especially those that were kind of at the end of their program and they're getting ready to take certification exam. They don't want to lose their momentum either. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that we've shared with them. So from the faculty standpoint, you'll be able to share it with them as well. When they ask you, how do they stay focused and motivated? We want them to have a plan. Look, winning any war starts with a good plan, right? And having it outlaid. So building a plan to improve their knowledge deficits and identifying what their knowledge deficits are. Because one of the things that we've learned from students is when they sit down to study, they kind of tend to focus on the areas that they're most comfortable and away from the areas where they're least comfortable. So if they've always worked in cardiovascular, that's an area where they feel comfortable and that's where they're going to focus on. But they know that, and it builds up their self-esteem because they can answer those questions and they feel good about it. And that's good. We want them to feel good, but we need them to also spend some time on the areas where they may be weak. And so having a plan to identify those is a good place to start. Next slide. So we also need to stay engaged with students. We can't just have them out there floundering around and trying to figure things out. And part of having a good plan is sharing that plan with somebody and then having somebody to help you stay on plan, seeing what your progress is, talking things out. We even think of faculty, this provides us a unique opportunity. So we're going to talk about some mentoring, ways that faculty can really be more of a mentor to the students, and then maybe even some ideas for setting up virtual office hours. So assessing the student's knowledge is a great place to start, and having something to identify those strengths and weaknesses for the student. Now, we have a predictor exam, and that's what you're seeing there, and I'll show you some more of that. And obviously, we're partial to hours, but we also know that there's other exams on the market that can identify strengths and weaknesses. We have the only predictor exam, so that's why we're partial to ours, and I do all those statistics, so I'm really partial to it. But you got to have something that they can build their plan from. So the first step in doing that is identifying the strengths and weaknesses. Students can purchase their own predictor exam, or, the universities, you can kind of decide how you do that. So after they've taken that exam, and I always tell them, treat it just like the certification exam. Mm-hmm. Give yourself 3 hours. Don't look up answers to the questions. Answer it, because you really do want to have a baseline knowledge of where your areas are, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. So on our predictor exam, this is going to part of their performance breakdown that they'll get. So you see it's by knowledge area: cardiovascular, dermatology, endocrine, ENT. All of the knowledge areas are included there with what they scored individually in those areas. And so I always tell them, get you out a calendar, actually a calendar, or you can use your iPhone, but you have to detail your plan. So on Monday, the 27th, I'm working. I'm not going to be able to get any studying in that day. But on the 28th, I'm off, and dermatology, I'm really weak in that. So I'm going to focus on dermatology all day, and I'm going to spend 8 hours there. And then on Wednesday, I need to move to cardiovascular. And so actually have the plan laid out, because that really does help keep them focused. Because after they've worked all day the 27th and they're on the 28th now, they're like, okay, what am I going to do today? And there's something about opening up a calendar and seeing, okay, this is what I have on my schedule today, so this is what I'm going to focus on. And it really helps you to stay focused. It helps me to stay focused, and I'm not studying, but I have my plan laid out, and it helps me keep all of my areas of life in sync. Now, when you're doing life, what happens? Life happens. So the best laid plans sometimes have to be adjusted a little bit, but that's okay. And that's what I tell them. If something comes up on the 28th, oh man, I forgot I had an appointment that day at 9 o'clock. Okay, so go ahead and take those 2 hours that you're going to miss studying for cardiovascular and figure out another time that you can put that in, because you need to continue to work the plan, and that helps you to stay focused. So we even break it down a little bit further for the students. So they can click on that little plus sign beside cardiovascular, and it's going to show them, these are the questions that you got on your exam. These are the diagnoses that were there. And then we have it broken down by domain. So assessment, diagnosis, planning, evaluation, and pharmacology. So they can see, hey, I'm studying cardiovascular today, but I need it. Where does my focus on cardiovascular need to be? Does it need to be on heart failure? Does it need to be on managing lipids? Does it need to be on hypertension? Where does it need to be? And so that breakdown really helps them to drill down, so that on Wednesday the 29th, when they're studying cardiovascular, they know which areas they need to go to. Now, what are you going to tell them to study? Questions are a good place to start. There's multiple things that are out there that will provide students with questions. Again, we happen to be kind of partial to ours. We have QBank management, assessment, prescribing, and pharmacology. And so management is the area that has all of those domains. And so I usually tell them, you go to QBank management, you tell it to give me questions in cardiovascular, and you work through those cardiovascular questions, paying particular attention to the rationales, because that's where the meat of the learning is, right? And so if you're doing a question on heart failure and you're reading that rationale and there's something that just doesn't make sense to you, then maybe you need to go back and look at the pathophysiology of heart failure. That's helping to seek that knowledge for the student and helping them to learn and grow, and they're staying in that thinking mode of learning. So when they're able to go take their certification exam, or when this is lifted and they get back in the classroom, they are still in the mode of staying focused on learning. I still need to stay focused on learning. We learn something new every day, but this is a great plan for students to help them to stay focused on that. We also have a clinical practice guidelines book, and so they can use ours or any, but we always take what they learned from their exam, write out a list, your exam checklist. I need to be focused on lipid disorders. I need to be focused on hypertension. This one has respiratory. I need to look at acute bronchitis. And then use a clinical practice guidelines book. Look at acute bronchitis. What are the subjective and objective findings for that clinical presentation? How do I diagnose acute bronchitis? What's going to be in my differential diagnosis for that? What's going to be my pharmacological and non-pharmacological management? You go through all of that, and that's going through those domains, right? And helping them to really, again, recall that information and seek that information for them. We tell them to do that when they're in clinicals. We know that they can't go to clinicals right now, but I always tell them, you pick one patient from that day that had something that you just need to know more about, or maybe you saw the preceptor do something that you're just not that familiar with, and you take that patient and you go home and you find that diagnosis in a clinical practice guidelines book, because now you have a real patient to put with that information, and it brings the evidence-based practice, because that's what they're going to be tested on, is evidence-based practice. It brings the evidence-based practice into view for that patient, and again, helps them to really recall that information. Next. So we also give you a breakdown on our predictor exam, which I love, of the domains: assessment, diagnosis, planning and implementation, evaluation, and pharmacology. And so this one is really weak in diagnosis. And so you need to tell them when they're going through their exam checklist, you need to pay particular attention to all the things that are included in that domain. And I usually share with them what AANP says are included in those domains. That's the one that I use. I know there's others that are out there, but what's included in the diagnosis domain? How do you arrive at the diagnosis? What are the differential diagnoses? Those sorts of things. If they're weak in pharmacology, I usually recommend that they want to consider getting the QBank prescribing. If they're weak in pathophysiology, they may want to consider that. So just giving you a little bit more information to help guide their plan. Next slide. And so you need to develop your plan as well as a faculty. And so actually schedule time that you can connect with that student and say, because if they know that you're going to be connecting with them on next Monday, that's going to help them stay focused on their plan, because they're going to want to be able to give you a good report. And you can always see, and Betty will be happy to share if they are using any of our products, that you as the faculty can go in and see how much did they get done this past week on cardiovascular. And you can even see how they're answering some of the questions and kind of determine what their critical thinking process is, so that you know as faculty how to help guide them. It's maybe consider establishing virtual office hours, and so share that with everyone. And so during the virtual office hours, they can be connected with you. So if something comes up and they have a question, they can reach out to you virtually. But I would have those established times to follow up with the patient and make sure that they're working the plan. The mentoring role, ask them things about their life too, because we don't want them to be so stressed out that they're not working their plan. And so it gives you a unique opportunity to really connect with the student in that mentoring role. So I'm sorry, next slide. So they're probably going to ask you, because we get this question a lot too, how do I know I'm ready? When do I take my certification exam? As faculty, we definitely want to make sure that we keep our pass rates up, right? And so, because we're always thinking about that in the back of our mind. But we want to tell them there's no rush to go take the exam. We need to take it when you're ready. Work your plan, okay? Because if you have weak areas, we need to focus on those weak areas. So work your plan. Have it laid out for you. Maybe consider doing 4 weeks to begin with, but at the end of 4 weeks, maybe take another predictor exam. see where you are, because if you're not above 70% on that predictor exam, you're not quite ready yet, because our statistics tell us 70% or better, they're highly likely to pass the certification exam on the first attempt. And so those are some ideas, but we want them to make sure that everything's in order, that they have worked over their weak areas, that they feel a little bit more comfortable, maybe any stressors, because we always think about those variables that are going to impact them when they go take their certification exam. You certainly don't want them to go take it when they're so stressed out that they can't recall information. So make sure that they have some coping mechanisms in place, that things are really settled down. I don't know when that's going to happen, and I don't think any of us can say an exact date, but it happens here, right? So regardless of what's going on around us in our world, because it's true every day when they go take certification exam, there's students that I hear from that are dealing with major stressors in their lives. And so I don't know that we'll ever remove all those stressors, but the important part is, are you able to deal with the stressors? And so I think, again, that's where the mentoring comes in, and to help them be emotionally and mentally ready to go take the exam.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to see what we can do to help you stay focused. And I know that's much easier said than done, right? We hear you. We realize that some of you may be working frontline in addition to your teaching role. Perhaps you've worked a 12-hour shift. You experienced more than you'd like to discuss. Maybe you came home to a spouse that's unemployed, kids out of school needing your attention. You're worried about your parents or grandparents. You might be even worried that you could get the virus and spread it to your loved ones, and you fear going to work every day. You may just want to be left alone when you get home. We hear you, and more importantly, we applaud you for working frontline. We get it. But, you know, you have to stay focused and stay strong. And how do you manage that with the weight of the world on your shoulders? Well, no matter what, you've got to get up, dress up, show up, and never give up. Those are some little sayings I kind of took from someone else, but I like it. It kind of helps stay focused on. But there's 3 possible ways that we can help you accomplish this: communication, time management, and stress reduction. By communication, we mean keep all lines of communication open with your family, your friends, and your colleagues. Your family needs you too. You can't just, you know, be so engrossed in your needs that you forget about the family. They have needs as well. They need your attention too. Your friends are crying for, you know, we don't get out together anymore. You need those friends. But most importantly is your colleagues, because your colleagues know exactly what you're going through. So help keep these things in perspective. You need to vent with your colleagues. Communication helps relieve some of that stress and tension. You can't hold it all in. And your colleagues are probably your best support system because y'all can vent about the same thing. And some of the ventings help you arrive at good decisions for keeping students focused, as well as staying on track and keeping, you know, helping with your emotional support. So keep those things in mind. Keep them close. You need each other. And you must, you know, communicate with your dean or your program manager, program directors, because they may be looking for you for suggestions. You might have been put on the task force for the coronavirus to bring any kind of information to the front line, to the committees, to help you keep things straight, to learn about alternatives to clinical or proctoring, or just keeping the students on track no matter which part of the curriculum they're in. Everybody's worried about the graduates and getting them out on time, but still you have those going into the clinical settings too that are missing those hours. So try to keep everything in perspective and communicate. Share those suggestions, share those ideas, what others are doing, what you're hearing. And things are a little bit different now, and who knows what the future holds or how long we can stay in this situation. But perhaps some of these new ways may be carried over once this pandemic is over. So keep an open mind and keep those doors of communication open. I think that you will get a lot from that. The next thing is Dr. Baldridge has already mentioned was time management. And it is important to keep that calendar handy, keeping you on task, helping you meet those deadlines, scheduling assignments, making sure those exams are scheduled, and then working with your students to make sure that they're on track. But you can't forget about yourself. And I know how you are. You make these, because I do it too, you make these tasks, check off, check, yeah, I got all that checked off. But what are you doing for yourself? Or, you know, you're not going to the spa, you're not getting your pedicures or manicures, you're not getting your hair done, all those special little things we're not doing. But there could be some special things that you could add to the calendar. Because if you add it to the calendar and put time in there for yourself, you're going to get it done. Whether it's meditating, praying, reading a book, doing a bubble bath, exercising, whatever brings you to your good space, that's what you have to add to the calendar and follow it. You need all those other tasks to stay focused, but you also have to have time for you. If you're stressed and you're not taking time for yourself, you're not going to do a good job. So try to put on the calendar and check that mark off. And another thing for stress reduction is staying physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally healthy. That's very hard to do, but if you kind of think about ways to get into your safe space, you should be able to stay healthy. Keep your immune system work, eat well, rest well, exercise. These things help keep that immune system well, so that even though you're being exposed to some of these patients who are positive for COVID, you're strong and you can probably fight it off better. And if you did get it, you would probably do very well if you are not so stressed. Be your best as often as you can and keep telling yourself, I got this, I can do this. So stay healthy, stay strong, stay safe, keep your students on track. Whether, like I said, it's the graduates or those going into the clinical for the first rotation, but hang tight. All right, Dr. Amelie, I'm sending it back to you.
All right, thank you, Betty. And, you know, I know a lot of people appreciate hearing that, especially from your perspective, because you were faculty and practicing for so long. So thank you for adding all of that. You know, this is the time of year. In fact, this week is the time of year that we always get to visit with you. We get to see you. And that meeting is NOMF, obviously. That's taking place later this week. And I'll just be honest with you, we're crushed that we're not going to get to see you, because it's a highlight for all of us. I mean, Betty, Kathy, Jeannie, and it's just a highlight for us to get to visit with you. So what we thought we would do, and we're going to be quick, but we wanted to introduce you to what we've been working on since we last saw you. And this is the one I'm the most proud of. You know, we have rolled out brand new reporting for our predictor exam. And it's huge. It's a game changer, because not only does it give you how well your student did, and of course it has a cohort component, it tells them exactly where their weaknesses were. So in the realm of cardiovascular, you know, it gives an overall percent. They did well, 75%, it was green. That was a good score. But they didn't do so well in pharmacology or peripheral artery disease. It shows them exactly where their weaknesses are. And so this is something we're especially proud of. This is new, and, you know, again, we wanted to show this to you when we saw you at NOM. Some of you already have it. We also have the same kind of reporting for our 3P exam. This is an example of what you see as far as the cohort. So it gives you that same amount of detail by knowledge area and how well they did and how many questions they got in assessment, in pharmacotherapeutics, and pathophysiology. So this is a really enlightening report. And one of the things that is so valuable to you is it helps you see where your program's strengths and your weaknesses are. And, you know, as we tell the students, when you turn your weaknesses into strengths because you know where they are, and you couple it with what you already do well, your students are going to be a terrific reflection of you and what they got from your program. So I'm crazy about the cohort reporting. I just think it's a game changer. And another thing is that we've heard you. We've heard about QBanks, all of our QBanks. We have them in management, in assessment and prescribing and pathophysiology, we heard that you wanted better pricing. And so we have new pricing starting next month. The question banks have 800 questions in them now. And as Kathy spoke about, it's the rationales that help grow and stretch the student's knowledge base. So I usually tell them, it doesn't even matter to me whether you got the question wrong or right. It's all about the rationale, because that's what's going to grow and that's going to stretch your knowledge base. So we've got banks and questions, here they are, but we have a new one. And this is one that's specifically built. We call it MyQBank Foundations. It's going to be available this summer, but it is specific for the 3P exam. So it's about 600 questions, and it really focuses in on those 3 Ps where you want to make sure your students are strong, because if they're weak in the 3 Ps, it just gets more difficult for them to progress successfully as they go through their program. So this is a really good bank. We haven't forgotten about women's health. We now, or will have, developed a predictor exam, just like our predictor exam for the family and adult GERO exams. We'll have this one. It got slowed down a little bit because we were just not able to get classes because you didn't have them. You didn't have those students. And, we're all about exam security. So we have a predictor exam coming probably into 2020. Kathy might tell me early 2021. And also a women's health competency exam, which programs use, because we have a pediatric one as well. Family programs use this when their students get out of their women's health section. And it kind of helps them see exactly where the students' weak points are and where their strengths are as well. So we've been very, very busy. And, we're always anxious to learn your needs and what your ideas are, because we want to build things that are valuable to you. So if you have ideas for a product or something that you need, we would love for you to let us know. But if you have questions about any of our products, Betty is our university and faculty consultant, and she's a wizard. So you should pick her brain. She's just got a wealth of knowledge and experience, and that's why she works with us. It is to help you be able to help your students. So Betty, there's your email address. It's betty@apea.com. We have a lot of people on this webinar, so you might get an exploded email box. But this is the time where we would like to hear from you. We'd like to know what you're thinking, what you have questions about, whether it was something we talked about or not. We'd like to hear from you. So, Michelle, I don't know if you're there.
Hello. Yes, I am.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing. And
thank you so much, everyone who has attended our town hall today. We do appreciate it. And I do have a few questions for our panel.
Right.
The first one is from an attendee whose program uses the APEA predictor exam. Her students took it last week.
Okay.
She says, many students are citing their poor outcomes because of the stress of the current healthcare situation. Any suggestions?
Well, you know what? I think it's a really good learning opportunity, because if they took their exam and they didn't do well because of stress, that is a golden piece of information for them before they take their certification exam. One thing that students have got to be, and both Kathy and Betty shared it, they have to be in a good mental place. It is mentally exhausting to be a provider on the front lines. And if that's what they're doing, they can't even think about taking a certification exam until mentally they have recovered. They feel refreshed. I have students, and I hear from people in the area who tell me, Amelie, I'm so exhausted. How do I study when I get home? You can't study when you get home if you're mentally exhausted. So for me, that's a golden lesson to learn, that if you didn't do well on this exam because you're mentally stressed, whatever you do, don't take the certification exam in that same mental state. Betty, Kathy, you have something to add?
Well, you know, all things test exam that we talk about all the time anyway, getting a good night's sleep the night before, you know, making sure that all stressors are taken care of. But you know, what I hear sometimes with the predictor exam, especially from students, is, oh my gosh, that was so much harder than practice questions in QBanks. Well, first of all, it's a high stakes exam. And so there's a certain amount of anxiety that comes along with taking a high stakes exam anyway, just like the certification exam. And so, you know, I think that it's important all the time, again, to talk about taking care of the stressors, doing all the things that you need to do. Don't cram the night before, but then using the results of that predictor exam to hone in on those weak areas, because we work in a high stress field too. And so sometimes, again, you just need to learn how to deal with the stress to be able to focus on what's in front of you. And so I do agree with Dr. Amelie that it's a great learning experience. How you handle that as a university and what you decide to do, you can certainly have a conversation with Betty, and she can maybe share with you what some other universities do as far as the predictor exam. But I do think that's something that we do need to be focused on all the time with the predictor exams, is letting the students know it's high stakes. Certification exam is high stakes. The career that we chose is high stakes sometimes. So,
yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. This is a question from someone who is asking about CCNE accreditation and in relation to some of the clinical site requirements. So I'll read it to you. It says, our school is not yet approved by BRN, but accredited by CCNE for 10 years. According to you, our clinical hours are dependent on the approval of our State Board of Nursing, but what about CCNEs? Most of the clinical sites are closed, and the alternative given to students is community partnerships in the form of COVID testing. Can this be considered direct patient hours in this circumstance, since we are accredited by CCNE?
Betty, you want to take it?
I don't think she can use that as direct. I think it could be an alternative as an indirect, the testing. It all depends. You have to follow the guidelines. And you just got to go with the guidelines and see what the state, like I said at the beginning, the Board of Nursing, your evaluations, the evaluation guidelines, NOF guidelines, all of that. You have to take all that into consideration, and each university is unique. And I'm not sure what they're allowing in their curriculum that counts as direct. If it's not hands-on, it's not direct. And some simulation could be direct, which would be if they're doing, I'm not sure that testing, just doing a swab and doing a testing is considered an indirect either. So it depends on if they have other assessment with that swabbing or that testing exam. So it just depends.
Yeah. One thing that I was thinking of when you said it was testing for like COVID-19, two things hit me. One was it's so important that in those 500 hours or even indirect, that they get a good quality experience. And, you know, we have phlebotomists who do testing. So I wouldn't like that for a nurse practitioner's hours. They already feel like they need so many more other than a swab, you know, or, you know, blood testing. But the other thing that struck me was the possible liability for the university if students knowingly went into, you know, a high-risk situation like COVID testing, and whether or not they had proper equipment. And it just struck me as a possible liability issue too. So I wish I could, I know that you're anxious to get your students clinical hours so they can complete them, but I would want to make sure the quality of what they got was really good. Something that would apply for a family nurse practitioner, especially one who is going to get ready to take the certification exam.
Thank you very much, Amelie and Betty. Our next question is about simulations. They noted that was mentioned early in the presentation and noted that simulation is a broad term. Can you provide some examples?
Okay. I think Betty mentioned simulation.
Yeah, I did. Simulation is actually similar to hands-on. And there are certain products out there that they use simulation with, like iHuman or some of the other mannequins. The programs go with it. They have scenarios that they present, and the student has to answer certain questions related to that scenario. So it does kind of give them sort of like a virtual clinic. And if they use it in that respect, then simulation does count. But there are certain guidelines that you have to follow with simulation too. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Kathy, Amelie, is that what she's asking, Michelle?
I think simulation is a great way to keep the students engaged and going through that information. But I think you'd have to check to see whether or not that really counts for direct patient care, because I'm under the impression that it doesn't count for direct patient care. And it's a great tool, but I don't know if you can count that toward their 500 direct patient clinical hours that they need. I'm pretty sure that with AANP, that would not count.
Yeah, it did say that it was above the 500. I don't think it is considered direct. From what I had read y'all from that criterion, it was above the 500.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question is, what is an ideal time to offer the 3P exam?
Oh, that's good.
That's you, Daddy.
The 3P exam is intended to be administered once all 3 core courses have been completed. The core courses are your pathoform, physical assessment. Usually, if your last core course is, say, assessment, then they're getting ready to go into the clinical setting right after that 3rd course is completed, we recommend that you administer it in the last week or 2 of that last core course. That way it tells you if they are ready. Our 3P exam says that 67% or greater indicates clinical readiness. So if they score 67% or greater, then we say go ahead and progress them to the clinical setting. If they do not, we say that you should not progress them until you remediate them and retest them. And you can use it as a tool to say if they're ready or not, and maybe they shouldn't progress, or maybe they should be dismissed from the program. It all depends on what you have in your syllabus that says these are the consequences of success or not success on the 3P exam. So we say do it before they go into the clinical setting, because that is the intention of the 3P, to determine if they are ready for the clinical setting.
Yeah. It puts students at a decided disadvantage when they begin their clinicals if they're not strong in those 3 Ps. And they're just at a decided disadvantage. And, when they're in those clinical hours, those valuable 500 hours, you want to make sure that those experiences are as valuable as possible, that they pick up, that next level, and they're not struggling with the medication or how do they do an exam. So that's why the 3 Ps, we feel just are a critical foundation for their being successful when they enter their clinical practice. And then, it's great prep too for their certification exam. Everything builds upon another. I know our time is running short. I just want to toss this out because it's a relatively new development. And I want to make sure that you're aware that ANCC has a home testing option for the certification exam. Let me run that by you again. ANCC is going to offer a home testing option for certification exams. So know that is out there. There's obviously, criteria. They need a mirror behind them. There's a live person, but that is relatively new. As far as I know, and as of last night, AANP has not offered that as an option, but ANCC has. So you may pass that on to your students who are, just kind of chomping at the bit to be able to take the certification exam. So
I did see last night that AANP they have some testing sites, but apparently they are booked up. And so students are still delayed because the time slots that they have are not very many. So,
yeah. So, I'm sorry, Betty. So I was going to tell our faculty that about a week and a half ago, we had a student webinar, and we wanted them to kind of get back and ask questions, and there were many questions. And one of the questions they asked was, when are these testing sites going to open? And obviously that nobody knows the answer to that. But when they open, I really anticipate that there are going to be far fewer seats. I mean, maybe the testing center has a 200-person capacity, but they may not be able to put in, they may only be able to put in 50 students. So testing is going to be delayed. And I think if you can plant that idea in students' heads right now, that they probably are not going to be able to take this when their little heart desires it, that they're probably going to have to wait, that it makes it, you know, they're not quite as disappointed, and mentally they begin to get prepared for that. So, but I wanted to make sure that we knew that.
That actually dovetails very nicely to a question that's in our Q&A, and that is, do you think APEA will provide proctoring services or interface with our CLEs, such as respondents, anytime soon?
You know, I would have to say no. I would love to be able to offer proctoring services, but there's so many components to doing it. And, you know, we're not going to roll anything out unless it is top notch. And, you know, one thing that concerns me about ANCC having home exams, and I realize that's a move, but we have so much experience with students in testing, thousands and thousands of tests a year. And if I could tell you how creative people are in cheating, that, you know, it's a concern for me. It's a very big concern for me that ANCC allows a home testing option. So, you know, it's good in one respect. It allows people to continue to move forward, but I have concerns because over the years I've seen just so many creative ideas and ways to improve scores. So that's a concern for me as a member of the nurse practitioner profession. It really is.
Along those lines, someone in the Q&A asked if any of you have suggestions for trying to minimize cheating in the during online exams.
Say that again, Michelle.
To minimize cheating during the exam.
It's, you know, I'll tell you, we learn more every year. Every year, we learn of new ways that people have devised or created to improve their scores. And, you know, I don't know, it's kind of like you're always behind them, you know. So I think really one of the best ways is to physically watch them. And if physically watching them means having them in front of you, whether, you know, on camera or not, that's the best that you can do. But
well, you know, some of our universities use Respondus, ProctorU, Proctoria, Honalock, and most of those we are compatible with. So
our exams.
If you are considering using any of those, give us a call. Let us double check for you just to make sure. But there are many options, and like Amelie mentioned early on, we found that GoToMeeting and Zoom have been quite successful with some of our universities. And you can make sure that they, you know, log in, sit in front of the mirror, you can see their screen, and you know, have them put their phones or their iPads outside the door, and then you can, you know, stay focused on them. Divide it up. If you've got 50 students and you got 10 faculty, each one of them does, you know, 5 at a time. So there are ways to help, what do we call it, breach integrity, but to prevent that. So, well, you know, like Amelie mentioned earlier, but there is possibilities now. And someone asked about it, is AANP going to do like ANCC? We don't really know, but we don't think they are. Yeah. Just because of the difficulty in it.
Yeah, I just want to pass on a comment to you in the interest of exam security. When there was a Facebook group, a very big one, Kathy passed this on to me, and it said, hey, did y'all hear that ANCC is going to be offering taking the certification exam from home? One of the very first comments, of which there were many, many, one of the very first comments said, $5 says that we'll have the entire test bank in less than a week. That was one of the first comments. That's how easy it is. So that's why, you know, as a member of this profession and having been for a long time, I just don't like the idea of testing remotely. So the students know they can get the questions. And so, so anyway, I have to pass it on. I have to pass it on. This is my profession. It's right about 1 o'clock, Michelle. What other burning questions do we have?
I have one more that came in. Would you suggest CE activities for learning experiences and indirect clinical hours?
I think CE opportunities are great because the CE opportunity has been evaluated, you know, certain standards and objectives, and it's a great way. And there's so many CEs that are available. So obviously we have some in clinical briefs and others, videos as well, but a CE I think is a great opportunity. Betty, Kathy?
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Yeah, it's a great way to learn.
All right.
Also, another question is, do you have suggestions for ways to remediate a student who is scoring low on practice questions?
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we do with our QBank is there's a section in there that shows categories. And the categories tells you, like Kathy was saying, if you did cardiovascular, say, and they've answered all of the questions in cardio. But when you see what percent they're getting correct and they're only getting maybe 30 or 40% correct, they don't have a command of the content. So you want to stress to them that just keep working the study questions over and over again and reviewing those rationales until they understand it, and then retake the exams and strive to score 85% or higher. We'd like them to score in the 90s, of course, but practicality, we'll say 85% or higher. And if they're not scoring that high in those study questions, first of all, they don't have an understanding of the content and they need to review it. So don't just continue to look at these questions over and over again. Go to their clinical guidelines book, review that content again so that they're improving their knowledge of that particular content, and then go back and retake the exams in the study programs that they're using. But they've got to focus on the rationales. And then if they don't understand it, go and search through a guidelines book to see what part they're missing and they're not getting, and then retest.
You know what, one more part of that, Betty, is that sometimes they don't have the knowledge base and they miss it. But sometimes they have it in their head and they don't do well when they answer multiple choice questions. And this is what I always get them to do. I make them read the question and go back up to the stem and read the question a second time, because sometimes they don't know what they're being asked. And if they read it twice, if they read the question twice, it gives them a focused area, and you know they usually get better. I've seen grades go up. In fact, I'll tell you that, I'll let you in on a little secret. So toward the end of this month, we're going to offer another webinar for students. And it is going to be, it's going to involve question dissection. And I think they're going to find it extraordinarily valuable in how they attack these questions, because for some of them, the knowledge is in their head, they can't pull it out. They just don't know what they're being asked. So if you stay tuned, we're going to have that for them, because, you know, obviously this whole company is created because we want students to be successful and we want to give them the tools. And that just seems to come up over and over again, that, you know, Amelie, the knowledge is in my head. I'm really good in the clinical setting, but I just can't pass these exams. So we're going to do that to help your students. And And I think they're going to like it. I really do.
Yeah. And there's so many different components to a question bank. And so, you know, the rationales have meat in them. Learning how to answer questions has meat in them. Pulling out keywords in the stem of the question. And so there's so many different components that adds value to those question banks and value to the student in firming up their knowledge. And so sometimes I think we need to give them the tools and help them to understand how best to use the resources that are at their disposal. Because like Dr. Amelie said, sometimes they have the knowledge, but how to answer a question. And, you know, so many programs have kind of moved away from testing throughout the program, and maybe they give a test at the end. And so sometimes just learning how to take a test is critical to being able to pull that knowledge out. So.
Speaking of questions, we do have someone who wants a little bit of a background on how our questions and how our questions are developed and who develops the questions.
Kathy?
So I write a lot. Jennifer writes a lot. I'm a family nurse practitioner, so I write questions that are directly related to family practice. Betty is a pediatric nurse practitioner, so she focuses on pediatric content. We do bring in expert people to write some questions, women's health nurse practitioners that wrote the women health questions, and we have reviewers of those questions as well. I do all the statistics on the questions, and so we run those through Bonus. We follow the guidelines for that, and I look at a question and see, you know, how well that question's discriminating, and we take that back to the expert contents and we revise it until we get some reliable and valid statistics on it. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much. Going back to Amelie's remark about staying tuned for a student webinar, we've had many expressions of appreciation for today's town hall. It's focused on faculty issues.
Okay.
And a couple questions on, do you think you'll do another town hall or offering for faculty anytime soon?
We're certainly willing to do it if you let us know what you'd like to hear about or learn about. Yeah. So we're certainly willing to do that. And yeah, I guess I don't want to tell too many surprises today, but Betty and Kathy are going to have a webinar later this year on a very hot faculty topic that I think you'll enjoy. Stay tuned and email, because we'll send out email notices, but I think you'll appreciate the content very much. It has to do with questions. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's all the questions that we have for the panel.
All right. Good. Well, I think this is a good time for us to wrap it up. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for being our guest today. I know I speak on behalf of all of us that we were excited about doing this, and hopefully you found it helpful. Good luck with your students, and don't forget to take good care of you.